The Trinitarios gang stands as one of the most infamous and ruthless criminal organizations in New York City, embodying the destructive intersection of poverty, immigration, and organized crime. Born out of the Dominican immigrant community in the early 1990s, what began as a protective group for struggling newcomers quickly morphed into an international criminal syndicate. In just a few short years, the Trinitarios expanded beyond the gritty streets of Washington Heights and into a sprawling network of drug trafficking, extortion, and violent crime. Their rise was fueled by a blend of desperation and opportunity. With little to offer in terms of social mobility or economic stability, many young Dominican immigrants turned to the gang for a sense of belonging and power. What followed was a violent ascent that echoed through the streets of New York City and beyond as the Trinitarios began to control drug markets, enforce fear, and expand their reach to other cities and countries. If you are enjoying this video so far, don't forget to hit the like button. The gang's influence grew at a terrifying pace. From brutal turf wars to deadly retaliations, the Trinitarios quickly earned a reputation for violence. But it wasn't just local. Their tentacles spread to international drug cartels, forging dangerous alliances and turning the gang into a global criminal empire. The Trinitarios became synonymous with bloodshed, betrayal, and an unyielding pursuit of power, leaving an indelible scar on the communities they once claimed to protect. Their story is a haunting reminder of the chaos that emerges when survival instincts collide with unchecked ambition. The origins of the Trinitarios gang are deeply entwined with the waves of Dominican immigration to New York City in the late 20th century. The 1990s saw a sharp increase in Dominican immigrants arriving in the United States, particularly in neighborhoods such as Washington Heights, the Bronx, and Harlem. Fleeing political turmoil, economic instability, and severe poverty in their homeland, many Dominicans sought a better life in the urban sprawl of New York City. However, upon their arrival, they were met with a harsh reality that included low-paying jobs, lack of housing stability, racial discrimination, and limited access to quality education. The social challenges faced by the Dominican community made it difficult for many newcomers to integrate into the American fabric. This exclusion created a sense of alienation, especially among the youth, who found themselves disconnected from both their cultural roots and mainstream American society. As the immigrant community struggled to establish itself, many of its members, particularly young men, turned to alternative sources of empowerment and protection: gangs. The sense of belonging and security offered by these gangs was alluring to those who had few options for success in an unforgiving urban environment. Against this backdrop, the Trinitarios gang was born. What began as a small group seeking mutual protection soon evolved into a more organized criminal network. The gang's name, Trinitarios, was derived from the Christian concept of the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which symbolized unity, loyalty, and brotherhood among its members. The name, while initially intended to reflect religious faith, quickly became emblematic of a more sinister reality as the gang's activities transitioned from mere self-preservation to violent criminal enterprises. In the early years, the Trinitarios focused primarily on maintaining control over their local turf in Washington Heights, where they established their roots. They became a dominant force in the neighborhood, often engaging in violent confrontations with other rival gangs. The Dominican immigrants who formed the Trinitarios were determined to protect their community from external threats and established a strict code of conduct that emphasized loyalty and unity. The formation of the Trinitarios gang was a gradual evolution rather than a singular moment of inception. Initially, the gang was a loosely organized collection of Dominican immigrants, many of whom were young men who found strength in numbers. They came together for mutual protection and solidarity, seeking safety in a city that was frequently hostile and violent. Their early activities were driven by the immediate need to survive in an environment dominated by rival gangs. Many of these gangs, such as the Bloods and Crips, were ethnically diverse, and they often targeted immigrant groups like the Dominicans. The Trinitarios' main objective was to shield themselves from these threats and assert their presence in neighborhoods like Washington Heights and the Bronx, where the Dominican population was growing rapidly. In the early days, the gang's activities were relatively small-scale, focusing on local territorial defense. They engaged in petty criminal activities such as extortion, robbery, and low-level drug dealing to maintain their foothold in the city's streets. The gang's role was simple: defend their turf and protect the interests of the Dominican community in New York City. However, as they began to establish their dominance in their local neighborhoods, the Trinitarios quickly realized that there was a much greater opportunity for profit in organized crime. Their ambitions expanded as they became more adept at running illicit operations. By the mid-1990s, the Trinitarios evolved from a loosely organized group to a more hierarchical, structured gang with clear leadership and objectives. The gang began to grow exponentially, with new recruits from the Dominican community eager to join the ranks. The increase in membership, combined with the gang's newfound focus on more lucrative criminal enterprises, marked a turning point in their evolution. They began to engage in drug trafficking on a much larger scale. Their links to international drug cartels, particularly those from the Dominican Republic, Colombia, and other Latin American countries, provided them with access to vast quantities of cocaine and heroin. The gang's ability to distribute these drugs throughout the United States gave them a reliable source of revenue and positioned them as a formidable force in the criminal underworld. In addition to the drug trade, the Trinitarios expanded into other areas of illegal activities, including arms trafficking, money laundering, and human trafficking. These operations allowed the gang to solidify its position as one of the most powerful criminal organizations in New York City, with a far-reaching influence that extended beyond just drug markets. The gang's ability to diversify its criminal operations ensured its survival and growth, making it a major player in the global organized crime scene. As their reach grew, so did the violence and ruthlessness with which they operated. Their violent tactics, including the use of machetes and firearms, became symbols of their dominance and fearsome reputation. The rise of crack cocaine and heroin in the 1980s and early 1990s created a perfect storm for the Trinitarios gang to enter the drug trade. The proliferation of these drugs had already caused significant social and economic disruption in New York City, and many established gangs controlled the illicit markets. However, the Trinitarios quickly capitalized on an emerging opportunity, securing connections with Latin American drug cartels, particularly powerful organizations based in Colombia, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic. These cartels had direct access to vast quantities of narcotics, and by forging alliances with them, the Trinitarios were positioned to distribute large shipments of cocaine and heroin throughout New York City and beyond. The wealth generated by their involvement in the drug trade provided the Trinitarios with the resources to expand further. They were able to reinvest their profits into acquiring weapons and recruiting new members, further solidifying their control over drug territories. Additionally, the gang used their financial power to corrupt local businesses, law enforcement officials, and even politicians, ensuring that their illegal activities could operate with relative impunity. Their influence permeated various sectors of society, enabling the Trinitarios to build an entrenched criminal empire. The gang's ties to Latin American cartels, especially the notorious Medellin and Cali cartels in Colombia, allowed them to serve as key players in the global drug trade. The Trinitarios acted as vital middlemen between drug suppliers in Latin America and consumers in the United States and Europe. Their well-established smuggling routes through ports and airports were critical in moving large quantities of narcotics into the U.S. This international network not only gave the Trinitarios an immense economic advantage, but also helped them gain an extensive reach across continents, positioning them as one of the most powerful and feared criminal organizations of their time. The Trinitarios gained a brutal reputation for their use of violence and intimidation, which played a central role in their rise to power within the criminal underworld. Their code of conduct, built on the principles of loyalty and fear, demanded unwavering allegiance from members. Disobedience or perceived betrayal was met with swift and often deadly retribution. The gang's hierarchical structure reinforced this brutal code, with those at the top commanding the loyalty and respect of their subordinates through the constant threat of violence. One of the gang's most infamous practices was its use of machetes, which became a symbol of their brutal tactics. These weapons were employed not only in violent confrontations with rival gangs, but also as a method of maintaining discipline within their ranks. New recruits were often initiated through violent acts, sometimes involving machetes, which symbolized their commitment to the gang's code. Betrayal or failure to meet expectations resulted in severe punishment, with some members being executed to send a chilling message to others. This extreme level of violence ensured that the Trinitarios maintained strict control over their operations and instilled a sense of fear that kept others in line. The gang's clashes with rival factions such as the Bloods, Crips, and Latin Kings were often marked by shootouts, stabbings, and public executions. Turf wars over drug-dealing territories were a common cause of these violent encounters, with the Trinitarios using brutal force to secure and expand their control. They relied on tactics such as drive-by shootings and machete attacks, designed not only to eliminate enemies but to instill terror within the community. One of the most shocking instances of the Trinitarios' violent nature was the 2018 murder of 15-year-old Lisandro Jr. Guzman Feliz. The tragic incident, captured on surveillance cameras, showed Jr. being dragged from a Bronx bodega by several gang members and savagely attacked with machetes and knives. Though it was later revealed to be a case of mistaken identity, the murder highlighted the gang's culture of ruthless violence and the deadly consequences of their power struggles. This event shocked the city and served as a grim reminder of the lengths to which the Trinitarios would go to maintain control and instill fear. As the Trinitarios expanded their influence in the criminal world, law enforcement agencies ramped up their efforts to dismantle the gang. The violent nature of their operations, combined with their involvement in drug trafficking, caught the attention of both local and federal authorities. The New York Police Department (NYPD) collaborated with agencies such as the Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA) to conduct high-profile investigations and operations targeting the gang's leadership and criminal activities. In 2009, one of the most significant efforts to take down the Trinitarios occurred when the NYPD executed a series of coordinated raids. These raids were designed to dismantle the gang's infrastructure, arresting high-ranking members and seizing large quantities of drugs, firearms, and cash. The operation resulted in numerous arrests and briefly disrupted the gang's activities. However, the Trinitarios' ability to adapt and reorganize quickly meant that law enforcement's success was only temporary. Rather than crumbling under pressure, the gang decentralized its operations, which allowed smaller factions to continue their illegal activities independently. This made it increasingly difficult for law enforcement to effectively combat the gang. The Trinitarios had established a robust network that spanned across various U.S. cities, including Miami, Boston, and Chicago, and even reached international territories, leveraging connections to global drug cartels. Smuggling routes, especially from the Dominican Republic and other Latin American countries, provided the gang with continuous access to drugs and weapons, which further entrenched their operations. Despite ongoing efforts by law enforcement to break the gang's hold on these criminal networks, the Trinitarios' legacy remains entrenched in certain neighborhoods of New York City. Their violent tactics and ability to operate with impunity still have a significant impact on local communities, even as their influence has diminished. The gang's survival highlights the challenges of eradicating such well-established criminal organizations, whose operations evolve in response to law enforcement pressure. Though the Trinitarios may no longer hold the same level of power as before, their presence continues to be felt in the shadows of the criminal underworld. The global reach of the Trinitarios gang was one of its most striking and dangerous characteristics. Leveraging its deep ties to Latin American drug cartels, particularly those based in Colombia, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic, the Trinitarios became a key player in the international drug trade. These cartels supplied the gang with large shipments of cocaine, heroin, and other narcotics, which the Trinitarios then distributed throughout the United States and beyond. The gang's ability to operate across borders and maintain extensive distribution networks in major U.S. cities such as New York, Miami, and Chicago made them a significant force in the global criminal underworld. The gang's reach extended beyond the U.S., with operations in the Caribbean and even parts of Europe. Their transnational network enabled the Trinitarios to influence drug markets in different continents, connecting suppliers in Latin America with consumers in the U.S. and Europe. The scale of their operations allowed them to control vast territories, from urban streets in the U.S. to international smuggling routes that passed through ports and airports. This made them a highly organized and influential criminal entity, capable of executing large-scale trafficking operations without detection. In addition to drug trafficking, the Trinitarios became heavily involved in money laundering activities. They used legitimate businesses, often in the restaurant, entertainment, and construction sectors, as fronts to clean the illicit proceeds from their drug sales and other criminal ventures. These businesses not only helped launder the money but also provided cover for their operations, making it more difficult for law enforcement agencies to track and dismantle their criminal activities. By embedding themselves within legitimate industries, the Trinitarios ensured that their illegal activities remained hidden and their operations continued to grow, cementing their position as one of the most powerful and elusive gangs in the world. The legacy of the Trinitarios gang is a somber reflection of the harsh realities faced by immigrant communities, particularly in urban environments like New York City. While their reign of terror has largely been curtailed through law enforcement efforts, the gang's impact endures in the neighborhoods where they once ruled, which included machete attacks and drive-by shootings, left a scar on the city's landscape, particularly in areas like Washington Heights and the Bronx, where drug dealing and intimidation became widespread. The social and economic challenges that gave rise to the Trinitarios, such as poverty, lack of opportunities, and systemic discrimination, are still felt in many parts of the city. The Trinitarios' rise from a local protection group to a global criminal enterprise underscores the power of organized crime in exploiting vulnerable communities. Their ability to recruit young people and entrench themselves in the drug trade highlights the intersection of crime and socioeconomic marginalization. For many members, joining the gang was not just about survival, but about finding a sense of belonging and power in a world that often marginalized them. In that sense, the Trinitarios' legacy is a reflection of the broader issues of inequality and exclusion faced by immigrant populations in the U.S. Though the gang's grip on New York City has loosened over time, Their story serves as a stark reminder of the destructive power of organized crime, particularly in communities where individuals struggle to break free from cycles of poverty and violence. The Trinitarios' legacy, while tainted by violence and exploitation, also highlights the ongoing challenges that continue to plague marginalized communities, making their story both tragic and cautionary for future generations. The Trinitarios gang story is a chilling example of how ambition and violence can intertwine in the pursuit of power, particularly in vulnerable communities. Born from the struggles of Dominican immigrants in New York City during the 1990s, the Trinitarios evolved from a protective group into one of the most formidable and feared criminal organizations in the city. Their ability to infiltrate global drug markets and establish an international network set them apart, but it also demonstrated the far-reaching consequences of organized crime. Despite significant law enforcement efforts to dismantle their operations, the Trinitarios' legacy remains ingrained in the communities they once terrorized. Their rise highlights the social and economic conditions that fostered their growth: systemic poverty, discrimination, and limited opportunities that often lead marginalized individuals to turn to crime for survival and a sense of belonging. The gang's reign was marked by brutal violence, extortion, and a culture of intimidation that left an indelible mark on New York City, particularly in areas where they had the greatest influence. While the Trinitarios may no longer wield the same power they once did, their story serves as a stark warning about the dangers posed by organized crime, especially in immigrant communities. It underscores the importance of addressing the root causes of gang violence: poverty, lack of education, and limited social mobility if we are to prevent the rise of such criminal enterprises in the future. The Trinitarios' rise and fall serve as a somber reminder of the complex web of factors that give rise to gangs and the long-lasting impact they can have on society. Don't forget to subscribe and join our membership for exclusive content and perks. Stay tuned for more exciting updates. Click the video below for more videos on Underworld Icons.